India is a living culture, a living civilization. While Egypt, Machu Picchu are great civilizations, but we see them in the books, history books, or in their great monuments. While India is still alive, and what Aishwarya said today is exactly the same thing. Whether through the Indian films or media, we project the correct image of India. If today India never occupied an inch of a land of any other country, but we did export our culture and heritage, the great heritage we are proud of. And if we draw a map of India, the cultural map of India, it'll be quite different from the political map of the world. And that is our soft power, or the hard power, or the real power, whatever you might say. To Mr. Mehta, I would like to say one thing. I appreciate you mentioned about Malgundi Days. The ICCR, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, which I head now, has come out with a book for children. These are the 26 stories which are told by our grandmothers in various states of India. I got them translated into English and printed it and beautifully illustrated them. And they are going all over the world to tell what India's cultural heritage is through our children's books. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mehta, the comment you made regarding changing information by analysis into knowledge, and then knowledge by practicing it into wisdom, I would love to hear a little more expansion on that, on how we should do that with our grandchildren. Thank you.
The first thing is really to have books available to them, to really make them familiar with them, to read to them. And I think finally that, as much as anything else, sparks the imagination. It's having to sort of look at something, reflect on it, and sort of realize that you can make of it really almost everything you want. That's how children respond to stories. They think it's about themselves, or a world that is almost, that they can people with whoever they want. That's for children. About how you do it in other ways, I think you read and you reflect on what you read. I think that's essentially what the process really is. But I think the original contact high comes from when you make books available to people, and they discover that not only is it a very easy thing to do, it's a natural thing to do, and finally, it is not only a rewarding thing, but it's something which will give you pleasure over and over and over again. That's why, for instance, one of the first things people do to children is read to them, and it can be the same story, but the child comes to it every day like it's brand new. Very, very few things can give you that type of repeat pleasure, I think. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
The lady here, please.
Ms. Rai, Mr. Mehta, it's a pleasure having you here. I am a lawyer from New York, and I am now the head of business and legal affairs for a magazine here in India. And one of my concerns when I sit with my team in India is integrity and copyright protection. How do you think that Bollywood, we boast about making 800 films a year, and talk about publishing, and how do you think we can maintain integrity in all the films that we make and educate the people who are watching these films? And also, how do you think we combat piracy in an effective way? Especially, my integrity question is actually about sex sells in India, and how can we maintain some sort of integrity when we make these films?
So, to be very honest, like I said at the very outset when I began, I'm really not an authority on the workings of my industry to know how they really go about with the copyright area of, and the making of the films therein. I can only express opinions on when you're talking about, was it about sex in movies?
Yeah, she said that, in India, yeah.
I just have to get that right. Well, I think to be prudish and say completely that we simply cannot have it, with what I address, the changing trends, the changing viewers, is we have to be realistic and know that is an impossibility. However, what you can have, and that has actually always existed, various categories of films, just like we define them as classics, or we define them as sheer entertainment, or we compartmentalize it as commercial, parallel art cinema. I guess this is alternative cinema that kind of would exist, whether or not you want it, whether or not you want to erase it. But in the past, and call me old-fashioned here, it used to be graded. I mean, maybe that's really childish lingo here, but you always knew it as A-grade cinema, B-grade cinema, or C-grade cinema. Today, that division seems to have surely blurred, and that seems to bother me simply because of the kind of influence it has on our culture, on our tradition, and our next generation, with the free access to it so liberally on the commercialization of cinema via television and everything else. So that worries me. But however, realistically, it will exist. We just need the support of what I said for all that time. We need the support of the system itself, of the government, and the film fraternity and the media together to define the movement and to define which way we are heading.
So my name is Anat Jain. Yes, Mr. Mehta, from your position of being in the business of, let's say, American culture, how much time do you assume it would be before Indian culture begins to percolate down into the mainstream American culture, seen in aspects of American publishing or American film and television, and to stop being perceived purely as ethnic media or ethnic influences?
Well, I think it's happening, by the way. When I went to America 15 years ago, there was very little, Americans were sort of much more insular than they appear to be now. I think they have become, over the last 15 years or so, more open to other cultures, let alone Indian culture. I think that they have become more receptive specifically to Indian culture because it ceased to be, they've always been sort of, it ceased to be exotic. And because it has ceased to be that, they've now begun to see some of the universality in it. And I think that's led, to the success of a number of, say, Bollywood films over there. The success such as, the fact of, there's Devdas, there's the Guru, there's Lagan, it's happening more and more. Bombay Dreams is opening over there next week. It doesn't seem so strange to them anymore now. So it's percolating down. Whenever it reaches the mainstream, I don't know, but it is a slow and a gradual process, and it comes, I think, essentially from familiarizing yourself with realizing that, what you have is only your particular culture. There are many different types of cultures. I think Americans are beginning to sense that, to admit it, and I think they're more open to other cultures than they've been in the past.
I'm Nitin Shukla. My question is to Mr. Mehta. Would you like to express your views about why we have won only one Nobel Prize? I'm referring in literature. I'm referring to Rabindranath Tagore. In these many years, is it lack of intense experience, as they call it, anubhuti, or is it due to lack of expression, as they call it, abhivyakti? If there is a combination of both, then obviously it ought to be a classic. Thank you.
Well, the Nobel Prize committee is legendary. It's weird, basically. And I've always been astonished, for instance, that R.K. Narayan wasn't awarded the Nobel Prize while he was still alive. He should have been. I've always thought that he was up over there along with Chekhov and as one of the sort of the great writers of the 20th century. I believe there's a complicated process by which books are brought up, or authors are brought up for consideration at the Nobel Prize. And I think some of this, I understand to some extent, there's a degree of sponsorship that the government undertakes, and that could have had something to do with why he didn't get it. But it's not because we don't. The Nobel Prize is not given for a single book. This is one thing I think I should make it clear. It is in many ways regarded as a lifetime achievement award, and it goes to writers who have a considerable body of work behind them. This has been the case, and I think that's why, for instance, Vidya Naipal was given it a few years ago, but it is a very selective and mysterious process, and certainly R.K. Narayan should have got it, and he is in many ways the most Indian and the most modern of all Indian writers.
I think the most powerful image that Mr. Mehta gave us was this story about books going into the furnace. Now, I'd just like to ask that, considering that the major limitation in increasing the book reading public in India is the cost of books. Even a soft cover, I was shocked to see yesterday, comes for around about 400 rupees in Janpat. Surely it would be more profitable to send books to India, which you think can't be sold, rather than put them into the furnace. Thank you.
I knew you were going to say that, and this was 16 years ago, and I'm not sure that I had the authority to just sort of get a container load of books and sent off to India. I'm not sure that I have the authority right now, because we're owned by a company that has all sorts of rules about how you order single copies, let alone a container load. But yes, you're right. Books, I think, rather than destroy books, and that was an extreme case. It doesn't happen anymore. What happens to return books is, by and large, they get sold off to someone who passes them off to someone at a reduced price, and ultimately they land up in the continental United States selling for a fraction of their cost, and people buy them. But yes, I think it would be absolutely wonderful if these books were made available, and I think it'd be even better if they were made available to many of the libraries that I think we need a great deal more of in this country, and which I couldn't tell you about because I lost my notes. But that, I think, is really where they should go. They should be shipped, they should be free, and they should be sitting in libraries where people who cannot even afford the price of a reduced book should be able to have access to them and learn from them.
Two small questions to Aishwarya. How do you think the increasing interest of corporates is changing the film industry, one? And second is that there are television channels which are beamed across the globe today. And a lot of soaps are being telecast every day, and they're binding the entire NRI community across the globe. And your views on the small screen, maybe if a powerful role comes to you, would you be, willing to take up that kind of a role on the small screen?
I did quite express it throughout the speech, but to put it in a nutshell, it is a positive trend, definitely, within the industry, because I guess me, as the rest of the audience here, would probably feel there is far more transparency, and would definitely bring a lot of order into the chaos the industry claimed to have in the past. But the one danger that we tend to see right at the beginning of this corporatization is what I expressed, is that suddenly there seems to be a trend of churning out a lot more movies in terms of the number of movies, because you're answerable to the investors, and that sometimes, the pressure of that sometimes does tend to make the creative area suffer a bit. I think we also need to find the balance, I guess, because this is all the beginning. I'd like to perceive it as the fractured stage. And that always comes about when there's change. And hopefully with this definitely becoming an integral part of our system, we'd be able to combat that. But quality in cinema should also be upheld while you're trying to combat the numbers. The second part about television, I have made it actually, I think, quite clear right from the onset in my choices. Like when I came in, I did a Tamil film when I could have really done a banner film in Hindi. I continued doing a couple of Tamil films. After apparent commercial success of Devdas, I chose to do a regional film in Bengal. Today, while I can be so safely cocooned and comfortable in the apparent comforts of stardom in our own area here, industry here, I have been willing to take up the challenge of exploring the opportunity offered to me in doing English movies. While I know there is a good bracket out there waiting to see me fall flat on my face and say, she went seeking greener pastures. It's not about greener pastures. I mean, I thank God that I have seen all that I need to see in terms of if you need these aspects to satisfy you, it's all there. I'm very, very, very content. But the reason I'm exploring the probability of working overseas is to get the international arena to recognize the Indian persona. I mean, it's happened with the Latin Americans, it's happened with the Far East, it's happened with the African Americans. I think it's time even the Indian gets that kind of recognition on the international pulpit, and I hope to be able to contribute to that movement. I won't be the first. It's happened in the past. I mean, I thank the magazines for giving me that accolade, but I'm not the first. I haven't been the first, but I hope to definitely contribute to that. About television, that is yet another medium of the creative aspect I belong to. So if it be challenging, interesting, I'm open. I'm a very open-minded artist.
My name is Madhur Bajaj. Mr. Mehta, the great success of Harry Potter books. My own experience, I was with my daughter in London and the book had just come out, the last one. And the way she grabbed it, she was so excited. I'm sure if I had kept a piece of jewelry and the book, she would have chosen the book. What is the reason for that? What is the reason for that great success? Is that linkage with the films? The films of Harry Potter have been a great success. Did that lead to the great success? Is it the brand equity, Harry Potter? What is it that led to such a phenomenal success of the Harry Potter books?
Well, I don't know, because if it was as simple as a formula, there'd be a lot of Harry Potters around right now. So it's clearly not a formula. It's not the films, because the films got made, oddly enough, because the books were so successful. The books became a phenomenon, and the thing about phenomenon, essentially, is that they don't replicate. And they happen extremely infrequently. There is something about the character of the book, about the way in which the author, Rowling's, just sort of created a universe that has suddenly clicked for these children. I think part of the reason is that it's actually not a particularly modern world that she's depicting. It's a world that's slightly in the past. It's not a 21st century world, not really, and it goes further and further into the past as the alternate universe sort of emerges. But whatever it is struck a chord which which happens very rarely indeed, and that's part of the magic of what books can do. And there's another writer who's doing it to slightly older children at the moment. His name is Philip Pullman. He writes a series of I suppose they could be called fantasy novels, but they have done almost exactly the same thing. They've been turned into plays. One of them has just opened at the National Theatre, and I believe that they're going to be made into films too. But meanwhile, they've reached that same sort of cult status that the Harry Potter books have. If one knew how to do it, one would bottle it and then we would all retire.
The last question.
Compliment both the speakers for a wonderful speech, and thank you for Aishwarya as the first film star we've had on a conclave, and I hope that this sets a precedent in a way. And thank you, Sonny. But I have one question for Aishwarya. Would you take the role as a James Bond girl and do whatever is necessary for that role if it was offered to you?
It all depends on the script, just as that rule applies to any and every film, irrespective of where that comes from.